awesome fight at welterweight. Possible fight of the night between the silent assassin, Vicente Luque, taking on Rude Boy Randy Brown. Matt, Randy Brown, I mean, he's had his ups, he's had his downs, but he's on a tidy little 2-fight win streak, finishing opponents left, right, and center. A big win over Brian Barberena knocks him out, and then after that, submits Warley Alves, a guy that a lot of people hold in somewhat of high regard because he has a crazy win over the likes of Colby Covington. Now, for Vicente Luque, he was an underground king, the likes of Eddie Alvarez, and it took him all the way up against some tough competition, some guys that were lesser known. He was finishing a lot of opponents, had a couple fights against Nico Price, including his last one. But it was a fight against Wonderboy Thompson that had a lot of people wondering, is Vicente Luque going to be able to do it again? Now, like I just said, he had that big win over Nico Price. The fight that really puzzles me is the one against Brian Barberena. It was an awesome one. They gave one to take one, and man, did Vicente Luque ever get rocked in that one. Now, he won the fight, had the tough one against Wonderboy, and beats Nico Price, so everything's kind of even at that point. And in this fight, he's almost a 2-1 favorite, whereas Randy Brown's coming back as the underdog. And if you look over at the votes on Tapology, at 771 predictions, 90% going with Luque, 68% saying he's going to win by knockout. Do you agree with the crowd here? Because this is an interesting one. I mean, Randy Brown, people are going to remember him. That Nico Price loss. But there's a lot of things that Randy Brown does really well in this division. And he's one of the bigger guys, too.
He is. And if Randy Brown sticks to his wrestling background, he should be able to beat Vicente Luque. The problem is, he doesn't do that. He's a very good example of a wrestler who's kind of fallen in love with his hands. I think the Warley Alves fight was an interesting one because he was just okay to be on his back against a guy in Warley Alves who's a multiple-time World Jiu-Jitsu champion. And for Randy Brown to be able to get the submission win is very, very impressive. Now, bit of a caveat in that fight. Warley Alves just didn't look like he wanted to be there at all. And it wasn't one of those cases where you're like, oh, Matt, you're over-exaggerating. I really want you to go back and watch that fight. Warley Alves was like talking to his corner during the fight. It was a very, very bizarre performance. So you can't take a lot of stock from that, I don't think, at least. It was a good win. It's still a W on his record. But you really go back and analyze that fight. Randy Brown wasn't really fighting anybody in that cage that night. He was fighting a guy who used to be Warley Alves, who he's just taking a lot of damage. We don't really know where he's at in his life, for that matter, at this point. Vicente Luque, when he hits people, they tend to fall down, and he never has a boring fight. Randy Brown might be brought into a slugfest, and that's what concerns me for Randy Brown in this fight, because with the Brian Barberena fight, I don't think Randy Brown's ever looked better than he did in that one. Barberena, a guy who we know has really good power, is tougher than a $2 steak, and just never stops coming forward. Randy Brown was able to finish him. He had those really nice push kicks to the body. Remind me a lot of Tony Ferguson, where he throws like jab and front kick at the same time. Randy Brown was doing that really well, was able to keep range, but again, he fell in love with his hands, and he just kept on. If he didn't get that first takedown, he would kind of give up on it. He wouldn't chain wrestle, try to get you to the cage, and then work for the takedown. It would be, okay, I'm going to go for the takedown, and if I can't get it, well, why waste energy? Let's just go back to striking. With guys like Brian Barberena, you can kind of risk that. But with guys like Vicente Luque, you can't risk that at all. Because every second you're on the feet with him, unless you're a guy like Wonderboy who can just create so much distance with their stance and their movement that Luque's power won't be as much of a factor. But Randy Brown, a guy we've seen get finished in the past before, against Luque, who all of his wins except for one are by finish in the UFC. And even the one where he didn't get the finish against Mike Perry, he completely disfigured his face by the end of that fight. It was very hard to watch. So I think Brown has the tools to beat Luque. I just don't think he can stick to the game plan and be disciplined enough to really follow that game plan that's set.
That's the thing. I mean, I get it with the odds. Vicente Luque, the bigger name, he's taken on a lot bigger names in terms of competition as well, and he's had those highlight reel finishes. And Randy Brown, again, people are going to remember that finish loss to Nico Price. That was a couple of years ago now, and since then, the win over Barberena, the win over Warley Alves, this was a fight that was booked earlier on in the spring, rebooked now. But again, if we really take together Randy Brown's total time in the UFC, he's been around since early 2016, win over Matt Dwyer. I see people in the comments pointing to the fact that he lost to Mike Graves back in 2016. Doesn't mean anything now. Finish win over Eric Montano. Finish win over Brian Camozzi, not Chris Camozzi. Lose to Bilal Muhammad. It's going to happen. Beats Mickey Gall, and so on and so forth. So he hasn't fought nearly as much as Vicente Luque. Randy Brown's a guy that I'd like to watch fight every other weekend. He has a fun style. He really does. And whether it goes his way or not, you're going to remember the fight. That's for sure. Same thing goes for Vicente Luque. Really crisp striker, and we talk about it here with Fight Night Picks a lot. It's normally technique versus the looping shots. Well, Vicente Luque is one of those guys that kind of has both. so does Randy Brown. So
when it comes to technique, they're not close at all.
They're not close, but they both do the same things. It's just to different levels, and that's why I really do think that Vicente Luque is going to be able to get the win here. You did bring up the one kind of black ace in the situation, the fact that in Randy Brown's back pocket, he can bring out that wrestling, and I think that poses a really interesting challenge to Vicente Luque, because normally he can either push a pace or he can bait people into his striking. With a guy like Randy Brown, he's one of those guys that can kind of bring out a Swiss Army knife. So it's a great matchup. That's a reason why I really do think it's a fight of the night caliber one. I'm siding with Vicente Luque. It would be a fight that I probably want to stay away from, because I do think there's a good chance that the underdog here, Randy Brown, can get a win. I just think it's going to be an awesome fight regardless.
No, I agree. Again, the best version of Randy Brown could definitely beat Luque. It's just when you look at who's Luque's beat, the level of competition that he's faced, like if he fought Mickey Gall, he'd probably finish him. And Randy Brown, in the meantime, beat him by decision. Nothing against Mickey Gall. It's just he's not really a UFC caliber guy at this point. Well, really at any point in his career. Luque fought guys. Again, Wonder Boy, even in the loss, it was a decent performance. I know he got beat, but it was still, he had good showing in the first round. It was just Wonder Boy was able to keep that distance, and he's a wonky striker. But Luque in the Nico Price fight in that last one, he really proved that A, he's got one of the better chins out there, not afraid to get into that firefight. Also, best friend and training partner of Gilbert Burns. So he knows jiu-jitsu is going to be really good. He's got a lot of Darce choke finishes. That's how he was able to beat Nico Price in their first one. I just think the more finishing ability lies within Vicente Luque, and he's the guy in this fight, at least, who I see having the higher ceiling. I don't know if Luque will ever be in that top 5. I don't know if he'll ever main event shows, but he's definitely going to be a top 15 guy. He's definitely going to make his way probably up into that top 10. And he's going to be a guy we're going to be talking about for a long time. I think no matter what stage of his career he's at, whether he's a top contender or whether he's just an exciting guy on the undercard. So I think Luque's going to be able to get done probably by finish.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to this one. Both going with Vicente Luque, but hey, don't sleep on Randy Brown in this one. We're really looking forward to the card. 11 predictions, including an extended look at our main event between Derek Brunson and Edmund Shahbazyan. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say,
let's get into it.